Okay, so today we're starting Beren and Luthien. Okay, so some brief announcements. So I just posted a Discord link in the Telegram book study group. So for anybody who wants to join that, or if you have Discord and you want to listen in sometime, we could see if we can make that work in the future. Also, these sessions are going to be recorded and then posted on the same Telegram thread. And so with regards to this story, so there's a couple of different ways to read this story. There were a bunch of different versions that were published, and we're going to see if we can draw from all of them. But I put a link to the Silmarillion version in the Telegram chat, so that will be our foundation. And anybody who wants to get the older version, The Tale of Tunaville, that was published in 2017, you're welcome to do that too, because it's basically the same story, but there's some differences. But it doesn't really matter which one you read. We will be going over the whole overarching narrative, and because the story is really not that long, we can draw from all of them. It won't be a big deal. Okay, so for this specific class, I'm just going to go over kind of where this story comes from, like in actual history, and what is going to be, what kind of things to watch out for. Rather than insulting everybody's intelligence by just giving you a biography of Tolkien, I feel like most people kind of know who he is, what he wrote, where he comes from. I'm just going to touch on a couple of small details, and then we'll get into what we need to know for the story. So, Tolkien, as everybody knows, born in 1892. He was actually born in South Africa, which is something that I didn't know. And then he ended up moving to England when he was a boy, and his father died and was raised by his mother, Mabel. So his mother schooled both of her boys in languages, and Tolkien could actually read and write by age 4. So he's kind of another child prodigy. He loved nature from the time he was a little kid, though he was never quite like a tree hugger or like a hippie or anything. He just didn't like the idea of the Industrial Revolution supplanting God's good creation with man's. And he felt that way from the time he was a very little kid, and of course that gets reflected in his writings. So Mabel then brought him into Catholicism along with his brother Hilary, and this actually alienated their family from itself, or it alienated themselves from their family, because the rest of their family was Protestant, and at the time there were a lot of anti-Catholic sentiments going on in the Protestant world, especially in England. So their families were very disappointed that they converted, so they didn't really have anybody. So Mabel was trying to raise these two kids on her own. So in 1904, Mabel actually died of diabetes, and he had to be raised by his aunt. That is John Ronald and his brother. So he made some friends when he was going to school, and they started a literature tea club. But later, most of those friends actually died in World War I. And he won a series of awards, and he became a philologist and a professor of languages. And he would sometimes, fun fact, he would turn classrooms into a mead hall, as some of his students would say. So he would come in with his Beowulf poem, and he would start like bellowing out the lines in Beowulf, and then everybody would think that he's like being really enthusiastic. And one student wrote down that he feels like he's not in a classroom and he's in a mead hall, which I thought was pretty great. Of course, he also hated technology. He hated cars. He called them loud, noisy, and needlessly fast. But he did end up buying a car for himself in the 1930s. And his whole philosophy was he was not a very considerate driver. His philosophy was, quote, charge and watch them scatter. So he would tend to get the road to himself a lot. And so in terms of his career, I mean, we know what other stuff he published, but some of the other stuff included he translated the book of Jonah for the New Jerusalem Bible. He also did some work on Beowulf, and he wrote a little poem called Goblin Feet for Edith in 1914, which became his first published poem. And so in World War I, he ended up being a communications officer. Most of us know that. And he was in the Battle of the Somme, and he was in there for about 6 months. And in the Battle of the Somme, over 1 million guys died. Over 1 million casualties. So that's basically the entire population of Lancaster getting wiped out 16 times over with no survivors. But he caught trench fever from lice and had to get shipped away. So some would call that divine providence. Now, prior to that, though, he actually met Edith, and that's where the emphasis of this history is going to go from here. He was forming stories in his legendarium in World War One, and after the illness plagued him, he was deemed unfit for service, but he kept writing. And of course, we all know too, in the late 20s, he actually converted C.S. Lewis into Christianity, as we mentioned in our Till We Have Faces class, but we'll get to that in a second. So, in terms of his wife, Edith, she herself is also kind of an interesting character. So, Edith was born in 1889, so she was actually a little bit older than Tolkien, and she was a pianist. And her and Tolkien met in 1913, and Father Morgan was a mentor of Tolkien that his mother left him with, and he actually did not like Edith and Tolkien courting because Edith was an Anglican, Tolkien was a Catholic, and Father Morgan was a Catholic. And he also felt that she would be a distraction and that she would take away from his potential academically. And so Tolkien, of course, he obeyed this, and he kind of abandoned her for a time, and she kind of just felt like she was shelved during that time period. And she ended up getting engaged to her best friend Molly's brother. And when Tolkien finally turned 21 in 1916, he actually wrote her a letter saying that he actually wanted to be with her and he wanted to eventually marry her. Now, he did that just in time to get drafted off to the war. So when Tolkien was at war, Edith kept a map of France hung up where she was living so she could track his location. She would wait for his letters, or she would wait for news of where his unit was, and then she would use the map to see where he was. And when he got home from the Battle of the Somme, due to trench fever, he was, as we mentioned before, he was deemed unfit for duty. And so, which, was in a way a blessing because he got to stay home. Now, Edith's guardian, Jessup, held very strong anti-Catholic positions and was enraged that Edith was with Tolkien. So they both kind of had the same problem here. So Edith's guardian did not like that she was going out with a Catholic, and then Tolkien's mentor did not like that he was going after a Protestant. But they were able to compromise. So Tolkien insisted that she converted to Catholicism after they married, and she did. So about 10 years into the marriage, though, granted, this is not a fairy tale marriage. It was still very, very true and good, and we'll see that later. But there were definitely some rocky areas and some turbulence. And so about 10 years into the marriage, there was some disagreements regarding which church they were going to attend. Because Edith actually really missed being a Protestant because she was an organ player. She was very involved. And Tolkien was a very traditional Catholic, and he loved the liturgical lifestyle. He loved going to tons and tons of services, and she didn't like that. So Given's another rocky area of their relationship was that, given Tolkien's profession, he naturally had many friends and colleagues who were very highly educated and very intellectual. Guys like C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams was in that group too, although Tolkien didn't like Charles Williams quite as much as C.S. Lewis did, but he was still part of that crew. And Edith actually felt very isolated because, of course, she didn't go to Oxford the way they did, and she, I guess, shall we say, couldn't really hang with them in their conversations, right, intellectually. And so she started to feel very left out and alone. And she actually regarded C.S. Lewis as an intruder on the family. She actually really did not like C.S. Lewis. But, of course, Tolkien loved him, at least until they had that falling out in the 50s. But additionally, the loneliness and insecurities would often manifest itself in her as authoritarian. So she would become very, very, she would just have a overwhelming desire to be in charge and call the shots when she would start feeling insecure. And later she actually got arthritis, which kept her from playing piano, which didn't help things either. But nevertheless, Tolkien still loved her, and it was the love for the children too that really strengthened their bond. Edith also couldn't stand confessing to a priest; she didn't like that either. But these are all things that they had to work on as their marriage went on. So Tolkien also couldn't have rational discussions about his faith with her. He couldn't like debate her the way he would debate C.S. Lewis or something like that. So that also proved to be kind of a challenge. But despite the turmoil in they managed to stay together in their marriage and for the rest of their lives. And the main bond that held them together was, one, their children, and Tolkien's understanding that marriage is very much about self-sacrifice, and that's one of the main things that comes through in this story. In his letter on marriage, we can see Tolkien's disposition towards marriage, and it's very ascetical. He outlines his beliefs on how remaining faithful in marriage is, quote, a piece of revealed ethic, meaning it's not man-made. It's something that has been revealed to us essentially by God, as he would believe. Because he also goes on to say that monogamy just doesn't seem natural. So to fight the urge and to stay on that path is ascetical and demands a lot of self-sacrifice. So, next slide. Okay, so in terms of the legacy, I'm going to read just a brief excerpt. This is a famous excerpt from one of Tolkien's letters to his son, Christopher Tolkien, published in the book Tolkien and the Great War. He says, quote, I never called Edith Luthien, but she was the source of the story that in time became a chief part of the Silmarillion. It was first conveyed in a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks and roosts in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917. She was able to be with me for a little while. In those days, her hair was raven, her skin was clear, and her eyes were brighter than you have ever seen, and she could sing and she could dance. And I will save the rest of that quote for later because I don't want to spoil anything in the story. But that encounter is one of the things that inspired this story that we're going to go through in this class. They had 4 children together, Christopher, John, Michael, Priscilla. And he would write letters to them, and that's one of the ways that we know who Tolkien really was, is by looking at the letters of his children. So, moving on to the background of the story. So, it should be noted that this story is just a small part of a much larger narrative and just one story in the overarching legendarium of Tolkien. So, there are things in this story that assume that the reader knows the history behind it. So we will cover some of the essentials so we don't get confused moving forward when we read this story. So the creation of Middle-earth and the fall of Melkor, we'll just take a snapshot of this. I mean, this could be a class in and of itself, but the story we're about to read presupposes this one, and there's characters from that story in this one. So it's important that I think we hit on some of those characters so when we go forward and read the story, we don't get confused. So it starts with Iluvatar, who's basically God, and he lives eternally, and he holds the fire imperishable, or the flame imperishable, which is basically uncreated fire, which holds the power of freedom and the ability to create sentient life, which is contained in this story. All life contained in this story comes from the fire imperishable. All life in Lord of the Rings in general, in the entire legendarium, comes from the fire imperishable. So the first of all, Iluvatar creates the Ainur, which are like Valar. So they're kind of like holy archangels or co-creators and stewards of the creation. So he's almost like creating his divine council here. So after these beings are created, the physical world is then created through them, through their music. And they sing harmoniously together, and the world is created. Thus the immaterial world precedes the material world. So something I can't really resist here is I have a quote from St. Basil that I want to read about creation. And I'm going to pull this up here. That's in my notes here. So this concept of an immaterial world preceding a material world is something that St. Basil actually touches on in his commentary on Genesis 1:1. So I just need to find the point. Okay, here it is. So this is St. Basil on Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, quote, he says, "It appears, indeed, that even before the world, an order of things existed, of which our mind can form an idea, but of which we can say nothing, because it is too lofty of a subject for men, who are but beginners and still babes in knowledge. The birth of the world was preceded by a condition of things suitable for the exercise of supernatural powers, outstripping the limits of time and the eternal and infinite. The creator and demiurge of this universe perfected his works in it, spiritual light for the happiness of all who love the Lord. Intellectual and invisible natures, all orderly arrangements, pure intellect, who are beyond the reach of our minds and of whom we cannot even discover the names." He goes on, "The fill of the essence of the invisible world, as Paul teaches us, for by him were all things created that are heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they are thrones, dominions, or principalities, or powers." That's Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. "Or virtues of hosts, or angels, or dignities, or archangels. To this world, at last, it is necessary to add a new world, both in school and training place for where souls of men should be taught, and a home for beings destined to be born and die." So then he goes on to talk about plant life and animal life. He says, It is not at this time in nature where the past is no more and the future does not exist, or that the present escapes before even being noticed. And such also is the nature of the creature which lives in time." So he's illustrating the differences between eternity, creatures that live in time versus creatures that live outside of time. And then we'll find out where okay. He says, he goes on to say, "Thus the writer," and he's talking about the writer of Genesis, "thus the writer who wisely tells us of the birth of the universe does not fail to put these words at the head of the narrative. In the beginning, God created. That is to say, in the beginning of time. Therefore, if he makes the world appear in the beginning, it is not a proof that its birth has preceded that of all other things that were made. He only wishes to tell us that after the invisible and intellectual world, the visible world and the world of the senses began to exist." So basically, I know that was a lengthy quote, but what St. Basil is suggesting there is that prior to creating the physical world, there was a spiritual world from which the physical world then succeeded. And this is exactly what we see in Tolkien's creation myth. Anyway, moving on back to the story. So one of these Ainur, Melkor, he wanders the void in search of the flame imperishable so he can harness it for himself and create sentient life. However, he can't do that. Only Erwa can. And then he tries to make his own music, in which discord is discorded with the rest of the music, and thus the privation of evil is born. So here we're seeing evil as kind of a privation. It's like going out of key in a song, which is interesting because somebody could know absolutely nothing about music, but when they hear something go out of key, they know it. So to illustrate evil as a privation and use music as an analogy for that, I think is quite an interesting move. So then Melkor becomes Morgoth later on. He becomes the first Dark Lord. He's basically the Satan figure. He's the true villain. Sauron is basically his errand boy compared to how evil this guy is. And both of these figures will appear as villains in Beren and Luthien. Additionally, one of these gods named Mandos, who is the he's the god of the dead. He oversees the world of dead souls. That's going to be important to remember him as well. He's one of the Ainur. He's going to show up in the story. So there's a couple of wars with the gods, and divisions between good and evil become more pronounced as the creation narrative goes on. Fast forward a couple thousand of years, we're introduced to a character named Fëanor. I have a picture of him here. This is fan art. This is not canonical, but he's over on the left. So Fëanor is, so why should we care? Why is he so important? Well, because he crafted the jewel that's going to be the object of the fetch quest in Beren and Luthien. He was very powerful. His mother, Muriel, put so much of her life force into giving birth to him that she said that the force that she put into giving birth to him could have birthed multiple children with that same kind of energy. And she knows her son was going to be very capable, but he was also going to be very proud. As a matter of fact, she actually had a vision of her son, and while she didn't want to convey the vision, one thing she did say was, quote, "I would weep if I were not so weary." And she actually ended up just dying of weariness because she put so much effort into giving birth to her son. So he did grow up as very proud, and he was the best craftsman of all the elves, and he actually crafted the Palantirs, those stones that you see in the movies that people can look into and see the future and see what's happening in other parts of the world. He crafted those, but those aren't even close to the most powerful thing he ever made. He ended up crafting the Silmarils, and those jewels housed the divine light, and he also put a lot of his own essence in them. So almost like how in the beginning of the Fellowship it says, like, Sauron poured his cruelty and his malice into the ring. He kind of did the same thing with these Silmarils, with these jewels. And Tolkien said in the Silmarillion, says, quote, "He guarded them with a greedy love." So then Melkor began weaving lies amongst the elves and turning them against each other and sowing discord and starting civil wars. And over a decade later, Melkor betrays Fëanor, and he surrounds him and his soldiers with 7 Balrogs, and they kill him. And he also kills Fëanor's father, Finwë. And the Silmarils end up with Melkor, and he fits them into his crown. And that itself is an entire story that could be its own class. It's a crazy story, but the gist of it is that Morgoth now has these jewels in his crown, and they're extremely powerful. And Sauron is also in the story. He's a lieutenant of Sauron. So, our next characters, Beren and Luthien. To put this into perspective, Beren is a more obscure character within the lore itself, as in, like, he's not connected to any of the gods or anything. Beren's father was the last chieftain of the House of Beor, which was a group of men known for their bravery. And these were some of the first men in Middle-earth. And the kingdom was destroyed in battle. I believe it was the Battle of the Sudden Flame, if I'm not mistaken. Beren's father was killed, and Beren vowed to take vengeance on his father, but he was forced to abandon his homeland and his father's own grave because Morgoth put a bounty on Beren's head, and he was driven out of his homeland because of that. And he knew he didn't have the strength to beat the armies of Morgoth on his own. Now, Luthien, she is actually Arwen's great-great-grandmother. And she is the daughter of King Thingol, who is so old we don't even know where he came from. He's probably one of the first elves. And also Melian. She is her mother. And Melian is a Maiar, who are kind of these divine angelic beings. So Luthien is basically half elf, half angel, and she's over 3,000 years old when she first meets Beren. She's the most beautiful elf in the entire kingdom, and she has powers that no other being in Middle Earth actually has, because no other being in Middle Earth is half elf, half Maiar. Those are our characters. This here is a timeline, or not a timeline, but a family tree to show who Luthien's ancestors are. So you can see Luthien gave birth to Dior, who then was married and gave birth to Elwing, who then later gave birth to Eros and Elrond, and then Elrond gave birth to Arwen, who marries Aragorn. So that's kind of how these characters fit into the overall legendarium. So that basically lays the groundwork. So now we can have a discussion. We can talk about whatever you want, or whatever it might be. If there's any questions, any comments, or just any general comments about Tolkien in general, or anything that I may have missed that you think is worth going over.
Sure. I mean, the two things that I noticed that I might want, that I hope I don't sound like a smart aleck person trying to correct you, but like,
Sure.
As far as Battle of the Somme, from what I understand about the definition of the word casualties is that the number of casualties from a given battle or war doesn't necessarily mean deaths specifically. Like, you can have technically Tolkien was a casualty because he was no longer able to fight. So the number of deaths would be a lot smaller. However, what I also know about the Somme is that is one of the most horrific battles, not just in World War One, but like in history. Mm-hmm. That like the fact that he got out just with trench fever is amazing for him. It's the number of people that got shell shocked and just the squalid, disease-ridden conditions of the trenches were more than enough. So that's not to say that because a lot more people survived that those guys were fine. They were not. Mm-hmm. The other thing was, yes, Morgoth is technically a higher ranking demon per se than I would say Sauron is. But another thing I've heard from Father Damick, and I think mostly from my podcast from him, is that, at least this is mostly quoting his opinion, but I think it holds pretty well, is that Morgoth is, very evil, and that like his ambitions are all like, I'm not saying that Morgoth is less evil. I'm saying his idea was that Sauron is actually like more the crafty one, mm-hmm. And so like Morgoth has he's very single-minded, and so like he's evil, but he doesn't like The argument is that like Sauron is more of a stain on Middle Earth, or more almost like the Satan figure, because in some ways because he is, especially from what I was just reading in the story, is that like he's actually the crafty one, because he kind of is better at Morgoth's job than Morgoth is almost, as far as when it comes to like really tricking people and corrupting people and getting stuff done. And so, but that's less of a like fact as far as like, I'm sure that can be debated, but that was, I kind of agree with that, in that from what I've heard about Morgoth, he isn't as much of a conniver as Sauron is, even though Sauron might be a lesser being technically.
I find that interesting because if we look at the first wars of the elves and how Morgoth even got the Silmarils to begin with, he basically spun all these lies amongst the elven houses and got them all to fight with each other and war with each other, and he turned Fëanor against Fingolfin, and because he knew that Morgoth schemed to have Fëanor kind of put all of his essence into these jewels so Morgoth could eventually steal them. So
That's
yeah,
fair.
I think it's yeah, I think it could be a matter of perspective. And yes, you that is true. Casualties don't necessarily mean deaths. I concede that 100%.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so what else did you hear Father Andrew say about that though?
I mean,
In terms of Sauron.
that's just the main thing I remember is that like they're at least comparable. It's like and I have to admit I haven't read the Silmarillion
Mm,
myself, like
yeah.
other than this chapter. I know he has obviously, but like
Mm,
I think that I mean yeah, again I'm just kind of quoting what I remember, and even
mm-hmm.
that I couldn't say verbatim. So
Sure. No. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting idea because, I mean, I know I never heard Father Andrew say that. I'd like to have that conversation with him actually
I'll have
because
to
I'm sure he
find.
did.
I mean, like any episode, there's at least one episode that specifically talks about like the realms, like the most evil characters in Middle Earth, Legendarium.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the name of it is. I want to say it's like one of the earlier episodes, but yeah, it's definitely there.
Yeah, 'cause I always saw Sauron, for whatever my own unscholarly opinion is worth. I always saw Sauron as almost like, kind of like an Azazel or a Belial, like basically like one of the um, big, high-ranking, um, most prestigious servants of Satan.
Sure. Well, like I'm not really familiar with those terms myself, but
Mm.
like what I do know about demonic rings is that like it kind of it's a little blurry to
Mm-hmm.
begin with, and so like there's like almost like there's not that there's infighting, but like yeah that there's some type of like the Bible refers to like Satan in one place and the devil in another, and it's not specific
Mm-hmm.
whether they're all the same person. I mean, like they all take on the role of the uh, Dark Lord per se, I guess, and so like. So yeah, there's not to say there isn't a difference between Morgoth and Sauron, but
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, I'm not familiar with those terms of like servants of the devil, but yeah, I can see, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I can see an argument for either case. So I just
Mm-hmm.
haven't researched my own beliefs about it, I guess. So
Sure.
which is what I'm here.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to find out.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on the divine council that Errol Luthien created? I know that like this is supposed to be about Beren and Luthien and all, but since that story presupposes all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I've heard all about the Song of Creation or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
that like that's supposed to be extremely poetic. And I actually, as I was just reading, that there's also, it seems like battle being done or sorcery being done in the form of song is a consistent theme, and so that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You mentioned the Divine Council specifically. That part I hadn't. Again, having not read it front to back, I'm not as familiar with. But like, I mean, it seems very obvious that intentional or not, that Tolkien's world is a mimicry almost of. It just kind of reflects nature and what is true about reality as it is. I need to read on fairy stories again. So I was told that was a good read, but
Yep.
it confused me the first time I went through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, The Ethics of Elfland by G.K. Chesterton is another good one
The
for that kind of thing.
Ethics of Elfland?
Yeah, The Ethics of Elfland.
Oh, that
It's
sounds cool.
yeah, it's an essay in his book called Orthodoxy, which is
Really?
actually not about orthodoxy. It's just
Oh, right.
he just calls it orthodoxy because I think G.K. Chesterton was a Roman Catholic.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of what I found interesting is how like even though like Tolkien loved the story Beren and Luthien so much to where he had Beren and Luthien inscribed on his gravestone.
I saw that. That was a really cool
Yeah.
picture. I didn't know that was a thing, but that's awesome. I actually met somebody in a card game shop named Beren, who was actually named after the character himself.
Oh, how cool!
And so yeah, no, like I had heard him say his name before I knew about this story, and then he put it together for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it makes that's such a cool name now.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool stuff, but it's like what's interesting is looking at his marriage with Edith is how it was not really a fairy tale marriage. They had to work through a lot of obstacles.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like not. I mean, I think about this in terms of like movies that I watch that are like, it's the ones that do have a bit more conflict that because they reflect reality a little better. I mean, like in puff pieces are like I find myself are hard to put down sometimes, but like the ones that actually have more emotional weight to me, or the ones I take most seriously
Mm-hmm.
and don't have any shame about, are the ones that are like, oh yeah, this is what life is like, and but it's still, that doesn't mean it's all gloom. I feel like you can have a depressing story, or a story that's kind of nihilistic, that's just as unrealistic as a fairy tale, like a fairy tale with no bad endings.
I think
Or
that's right. Yeah.
something like that. And so, yeah, I'm sure from what I know about how the story goes, it definitely doesn't seem to be either of those extremes. So
Yeah, and I'm excited to get into the story and pick it apart through that lens, just
nice.
because it very much is, and like I personally am not a big love story guy. Like I've read a couple of them, but I just I often find them just very sappy and sentimental and kind of uninteresting.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what I noticed. Just in like, I'm a big fan of Critical Role. I was saying I listen to podcasts at work. I've almost finished that story, and even some relationships I don't like hearing about, but even the ones I do, it's like, yeah, they seem so focused on the emotional side of it that it's just like, this doesn't even, these don't sound like real people almost, at least in compared to how I see relationships going, healthy relationships going IRL or in real life. The so yeah, like I do like love stories, but like it's been a while since I've read one or seen one that like felt natural, I guess, or felt like it wasn't too, like it wasn't between two teenagers, even though the characters were supposed to be adults or something. To be honest, so yeah.
Yeah. But I like what you said before though about how you could have a story that's just super nihilistic and unrealistic, just as how you can make like a perfect fairy tale story where everything turns out right. That's actually one of the reasons why I do firmly believe this, and only time will tell if I'm right or not. I do believe that Lord of the Rings will be remembered throughout time, and something like Game of Thrones won't.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I would say that just on the basis of quality, but sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, even just thematically, I think Game of Thrones is nihilism.
Yeah.
There's really no redemption arcs, and it doesn't utilize fantasy, or shall we say, digging into the metaphysics of life. It doesn't utilize that in a sense to paint a picture of good and evil that is archetypal. Instead, it just kind of takes the grittiness of our reality and copies and pastes it onto a fictional landmass and throws in some supernatural elements once in a while.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't consider the world building to be very good either, given that R.R. Martin said all the religions in that story are false and fake,
right.
even though they work.
Right, yeah,
So,
no, that's definitely...
I'm not really sure what he was saying there.
Yeah, it's definitely not something I agree with. It's, well, I guess while we're talking about other properties, well, no, there is a book version of it, but I've only seen the first season of the TV show. Are you familiar with Good Omens?
I am not. What's it like?
That's a very interesting one. It's supernatural humor, I guess I would say. It's a demon and an angel that are basically like, both of them really like living as humans on Earth, and so like they're both trying to stop Armageddon, basically. And it's just, there's a lot of jokes made about like the like the demon, when he's cursing, he says like, what the heaven, or something. That's the basis of a lot of it. But anyways, like, yeah, it's weird because it's like there's really, the enemies are kind of like the angels as well as the demons, and they kind of like put themselves on a quote unquote the side of the humans, and then it's like, oh, it's the angels. There's a little bit of spoilers, but not really. It's the angels and demons want to make this war that'll destroy the earth. But the point being that like even there's still like the it's humorous and like it's definitely not meant to be taken super seriously, and I think sometimes it does seem a little cynical,
Mm-hmm.
at least when you think about it really strictly. But the point being that like there's, and again, not just what, but like there's other characters that are humans, or at least partially human, that do like fight up against darkness and like encroaching themes of like evil and just destruction and stuff like that. Like even there still seems to be some semblance of good and evil. It's really confused because like there's angels that act evilly and there's demons like that act somewhat good, but it's like, but it's just kind of a reflection, an extended reflection of humanity, and that it's like it's not saying there is no good and evil. It's saying that like those lines might be more blurry than we think. All that being said, obviously, like the medium of using angels and demons as an example is really muddies it, but like I like it personally as this like I don't see it as nihilistic. Just my, at least my read of my take on it is that like it's not saying that there is no good and evil. It's saying that just because people dress a certain way or something, or just because people to look like angels, I guess, doesn't mean they are, or something to that effect. I don't know. Again, this is all just conjecture, and I this is very much open to opinion, or this is very much an opinion and not I'm not, I haven't looked up interviews or stories from the actual writers, but those would be interesting to see if any of them do you have a certain religious view or something like that, or if it is really like, oh no, we were just trying to make fun of all religions. I have no idea. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, did you gather anything interesting from Tolkien's life itself?
From Tolkien's, from just, yeah, I mean, the, just in general, like, the thing that's fascinated me most about Tolkien is that so much of his life, well, especially given that he was Catholic, and even though I was Protestant and I'm now Orthodox, that like we technically wouldn't have gone to the same kind of church, but the fact that there's still, that I'm finding out there's so much stuff that rings true about the way he saw the world is fascinating. Yeah, the fact that I like that, right, that he wrote from his life, because like I'm dipping dipping my toes into, I have people that are encouraging me to do more creative writing, and I always tell myself I don't know where to start, but like it seemed, if he did that good of a job by just kind of re-narrating his autobiography in a fictional, well thought out world, then like that's kind of encouraging. That like it feels like a better way of doing testimonies, because I know testimonies were a huge thing in the church I grew up in. But it was just about like, how did God save you and stuff like that. Whereas now it's more about like what is, yeah, like I don't know. It's a great way of sharing a story that makes that there's things like, even though the language and the like proper nouns might not reflect reality perfectly, like that there's still truths that and facts about life that can be conveyed more easily than just saying it, than just saying the cold hard facts themselves and stuff. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, even though he was Catholic, he doesn't really resemble like a late 20th century Catholic. He's kind of a pre-Vatican II Catholic. And what's interesting is I heard that when the Vatican II Council happened in the 1950s, he was keeping tabs on it and he did not like what he was seeing.
Oh.
He did not like how the Catholic Church was watering itself down, reforming its liturgy, changing the Latin Mass, and of course him as a philologist, able to, who is very intimately familiar with languages, he could hear acutely the changes being made, and he knew just how consequential they would be for that church.
Yeah.
And it was actually, and the interesting thing too about his Catholicism is his mother was very dedicated to her Catholicism, so for him, it's like Catholicism and his love for his mother were almost like inseparable.
Awesome.
So that's one of the reasons he held on to it so tightly. And there were many things that caused the falling out between him and Lewis in the 50s, but that was one of the smaller ones. Is they would get into these theological debates, and Lewis would often make these real snarky remarks about the papacy and all this other stuff. And of course, Tolkien, would get really offended by that.
Yeah, because it was personal for him.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, I know that he himself would say that, like, he doesn't do preachy writing and stuff, and, like, that's kind of trying to think of the opposite of Game of Thrones, like, I guess, maybe best case example is kind of Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, because I mean, that's what I grew up on before. I read both Lord of the Rings and Narnia as a kid, but Narnia I encountered a lot younger, and so that always had a more personal connection to me. But like having like I'm trying to think. I feel like I read at least the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe recently, or some of the other books in that series, and like it's a little confusing, like trying to differentiate, like, because both of them reflect a Christian reality in their stories. Just one of them does it with more overtness, and like it's challenging for myself because like I don't want to make an overt analogy or like kind of depict the Trinity like he sort of did. But I mean, yeah, it kind of stands to reason that, or it's pretty evident that Tolkien was a lot more successful in his. I don't think he was just more successful in popularity, but like I think he was more successful in sharing a Christian reality by not making it about Jesus. Like I know he was specifically like he mentioned that he would not depict the incarnation or something. That's something that I don't know if that would be in this class or not, but I would love to know more about.
Yeah, well, we could definitely go over that more in classes, although I will say, like in future classes, like not everything we talk about has to be Beren and Luthien. We can talk about other stuff and Tolkien. But what I will say about that, though, is I think it's in the appendices. If you read, it's an excerpt from Morgoth's Ring, where Tolkien actually writes that it was not elves that were to redeem the creation of the Ainur. It was actually men that were supposed to do that. And in time then, Tolkien writes the Eru Ilúvatar has to become a man to do that.
Right.
So
but that's in the appendices. Like, he doesn't spell it out. It's not the main story.
Right. It's not like Aslan or something. Where something's so overtly obvious.
Right. Well, that's sort of like a prophecy and stuff, but he doesn't actually go through and like show that happening, which is so it's interesting that like he still includes that as like this is what's going to happen in the future, and so but it doesn't depict it. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, I mean, like again, just like with the Christian themes and like his as somebody whose parents are having marital struggles right now, like I just commented to a friend that is like. I know there's marriages that do better or worse, but like any marriage that sticks together is something to be super proud of, and I think having a Christian basis for that is what makes most of them, at least the healthy ones, stick out. And so like that's I'm interested to see how that kind of to see his kind of how he saw his marriage going and stuff through this narrative of a spiritual world per se.
Yeah, I think he would make the same argument. I mean, he actually said that like the mindset to have is there's no escape, as in once you're in, you're in.
As far as marriage, yeah.
It was his philosophy.
Awesome.
Yeah, but in terms of the allegory and not making these too overt, what I honestly see is like as far as I understand, Middle Earth is not like some distant land or distant planet or whatever. It's supposed to be the Earth right here. Like
Yeah, no,
our
he
Earth.
canonically is like, oh yeah,
So
hobbits aren't around anymore, but this is Middle Earth or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. So the way I would see it, like one of the reasons why I don't think we see like a whole lot of like Jesus preaching stuff is because it seems to be more like almost like a prefiguring of the Old Testament.
Mm.
Because he was trying to create a bring back a
Yes,
traditional mythology to England
that's right.
because the Industrial Revolution was destroying everything and
Yeah.
modernism was destroying everything. So that's why I think it seems very much more reminiscent of the Old Testament. Like even when you look at the fall of Numenor, when they're bringing back human sacrifice and everything, and
Oh yeah.
the
Well,
gods just wipe them out. It's
yep.
like well, that's basically Israel.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that's actually a good point. Like, I wasn't sure about the like mirroring the Old Testament thing at first, but I mean, like that's a pretty solid argument.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, but in terms of this story, though, like it as far as the narrative goes, it's a very simple narrative, and I think when you revisit it, you'll pick up on that. It's a very simple narrative, but the metaphysics, the metaphysical implications of some of the things that happen
Mm-hmm.
are just so advanced, and they're deeply orthodox as well. That's why
Good.
like sometimes like I get this is a love story, but it's like it almost feels like calling this a love story is demeaning in a way
Mm-hmm.
because it exemplifies like kind of like this saintly love, like the saintly love of intercessions and
Mm-hmm.
self-sacrifice and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like that's one of the best examples. Or I mean, Jesus said that's the best example of love is laying your
Mm-hmm.
life down for your friends, and so like that's very in itself a very Christian theme that like
Mm-hmm.
honestly isn't as doesn't feel as popular
Mm.
as like you might think. Just thinking
Yeah.
about some of the recent stuff I've seen as far as
Mm.
like what the great moral high ground is or whatever. It's not often somebody sacrificing themselves for others.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
with some really cool exceptions, but not many, not
Yeah.
as many, I guess, as I would like.
Sure. Of course not. Yeah. Um, and I think an interesting example of that too is because one thing that I didn't mention actually is Fëanor, the
Yeah.
elf who crafted the Silmarils.
Mm-hmm.
He um, he had a niece who really took after him, and she became very ambitious, and she also wanted a lot of power, and that became a passion, and she had to discipline that passion, and we
Hmm.
see that happen in Fellowship of the Ring because his niece was Galadriel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
And also, Galadriel was also good friends with Luthien's mom,
oh, that's cool.
Melian. So, and Tolkien never actually wrote this, but some of the fans speculate that Luthien and Galadriel knew each other.
Oh
They
yeah.
were
I
friends.
think
So,
I've
I
heard
mean, if
that.
it's, I mean, I guess theoretically it's possible if Galadriel was friends with her mother. So,
Sure.
yeah, but, um, yeah, I mean, Tolkien really did have an admiration for that. That's why he kind of admired, and C.S. Lewis was in the same camp. They admired kind of these pre-Christian pagans who prioritized self-sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
raw will, glory in battle, victory at all costs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like it was definitely like it's not something like that like they were still pagan,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and that like it's not that they were saying. I know they weren't saying that like that's how. Oh, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, again, kind of pseudo quoting Father Damick is that like when modern people or when secular people today try and revitalize paganism as like a this was a better way of
Mm-hmm.
living and stuff, it's like it doesn't quite work out the same way that at least not in the way that Lewis and Tolkien were talking about it as far as the values and
Yeah, that's a very, very good point because yeah, heathenry and neo-paganism really is on the rise, and in a way, it's understandable because some people are just sick of modernism
right.
and they're tired of this secular emptiness and they want to go back to something that's more fulfilling. But the problem is like so much of those traditions have just been lost,
Yes, that's the thing.
so
It's
it's
like
a reconstructionist movement.
Right. That's a good point. That's a better explanation. It's like it's not that we know exactly what their lives were like, and so like we can perfectly recreate them. It's
Mm-hmm.
that no, we don't know what it was like, and that's why it's not like that now, because we've
Mm-hmm.
lost
Mm-hmm.
those things. Like they are lost. We don't have to try and fight. Like we don't have to have a mid generation crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I used to follow those kinds of people online just because I was so fascinated with them. Like I was following like witches and guys who were trying to be like neo pagans, and because like some of them are just LARPing, but some of them are actually really serious. Like some of them are
Yeah.
really
No,
trying
it's
to
weird.
make sacrifices to like grain offerings to Sif. It's
Yeah.
very weird.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like the way and this is partly kind of inspired by Tolkien, is that like, especially what I want to do with my creative writing is like find a way to, like, what is it? I mean, there's always a joke about like if you brought a caveman to the modern day, like they would think light switches are magic,
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
in a way, it's like the things that you don't anything that you don't understand fully, or like mysteries, like in the Orthodox Church,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we don't say that that's the word magic is used to be like, oh well, to I don't know, it seems demeaning almost, or something. Like there, like if
Mm-hmm.
I had a magic wand, if I had a magic philological wand,
Mm-hmm.
that's language studies, right? Philology.
Philology, yes.
Yes, if I had a philology wand, I would make magic a much cooler word, meaning that like
Yeah.
there's the like when it comes to nature and like just beautiful patterns and stuff, and like
Mm-hmm.
icons and things like that, that it's like there's something like you can't, or just relationships with things and with people, is that like you can't explain. My priest was saying this just yesterday. It's like I can't explain why I love my wife, but I know I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's beauty in that, because it can't be explained,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed, it's not just like an excuse for not having an explanation. It's because it's something that's not entirely knowable that makes it have worth. It's
Mm-hmm.
things aren't just valuable because they're knowable and stuff. And I see how much of a issue that is
Mm-hmm.
right now, as far as like we only seem to value what we can know for sure. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's a perfect way to have unending anxiety.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a very good point because, like, if our epistemological requirement is that we have to know everything empirically, that's going to drive us insane because we can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, is and like again, that's definitely why I like Tolkien, and am really reading closely, as I just finished rereading The Fellowship for the first
Mm-hmm.
time in several years recently, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to go through the whole trilogy and beyond, and that's something that I'm keeping such an eye out for, is because I want to pick up on as much of his language of um, the I keep wanting to say supernatural. I don't think that's the word. Enchantment or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, or re-enchantment
Yeah.
that he imbibes in the whole world, and it's just it is very un-American to think that way.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Well, one thing that he does, it's very Hebrew, and we're going to see. I mean, this is all over the Silmarillion, and it's in this story as well. Is he doesn't really draw lines between the natural and the supernatural.
Exactly, exactly. That's what I love about it. Like, because what's fascinating is the word spell, and like it has the meaning of like a magical incantation, but
Mm-hmm.
also like you spell a word, and so like we think of those as two different definitions, but like based on some of the stuff that the way his quote unquote magic system works, if there was such a thing in his world, is that yeah, it's like words themselves have power, and sometimes they do supernatural things, and sometimes they do less obvious but equal
Mm-hmm.
supernatural things. It's like it's not a science, or whatever. And so like yeah, I mean that's kind of, I guess, the opposite of enchantment seems to be science, and especially when you were talking about the modernization and technological advances, and how like in some that not that I try and remind myself that technology in itself is not evil, but it seems that a lot of evil is progressed by technology, and so like there is that kind of, they go together pretty frequently, at least as far as it goes for like, yeah, people that do not have the best intentions, is that they will find ways to make science happen.
Yeah, I mean, to Tolkien, it was basically the devil. I mean, like Isengard was basically like it's like you have the Shire, which is like the English countryside,
Right.
which is super peaceful and nice. Then you have Isengard, which is like the industrial city where they're
Right.
chopping down trees and burning everything. And
With that being said, like hobbits, and I never thought about this super seriously until I heard it said, is that like the technology that hobbits have, especially for like clothes and like coffee and different commodities that they have, they're still very technologically advanced for most of Middle Earth. And so I guess in that regard, it's like that it's not that he would say that like he's not Amish. He's not like I mean, obviously he wasn't, and so but I think he also wasn't theologically as well.
But right, yeah, I mean, he I think what Tolkien really did not like was, and which is the same thing that a lot of other guys didn't like, which is the modern paradigm, the dismissal of, and also like he wasn't hanging out at shall we say, this is gonna sound condescending, but like I don't mean it to, like peasant level,
Sure.
like he's up in like the ivory towers at Oxford,
Oh yeah.
with all this like, and actually, and he didn't like the New Age movement either. That's one of the reasons he actually really didn't like Charles Williams, and that was another thing that caused a rift between him and C.S. Lewis. Is this guy Charles Williams comes into the Inklings, and he's kind of a theosophist. He was in a group that was started by a guy who was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, which is like this New Age mystic movement from the 1800s.
Wow. That does. That's funny. Of just how much that sounds like a D&D faction. That like it baffles me to think that's a real name for something.
No, it really is. You look it up.
Wow.
Yeah, they were modern mystics, and they believed that like God put these mechanisms in the universe, like these cosmic patterns that are like mechanisms, and they believed that they could tap into those mechanisms to sort of bend reality, and Tolkien just hated that.
Yep.
But the guy Charles Williams was such an interesting character. Lewis was kind of enamored with him, and he really liked him. And Tolkien was almost like, dude, like, why are you falling for this weirdo? Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, and it's clearly obvious that Williams influenced Lewis's writing because he was very much into the Arthurian legends, and if you read That Hideous Strength, like Merlin comes back and like all these bizarre things happen towards the end of the book, and you can clearly see Charles Williams' influence on Lewis there, and that's one thing another thing that drove a wedge between him and Tolkien.
Wait.
A lot of it.
Well, yeah. What that reminds me of, and like I think what best helps kind of make a distinction between like what is like how do you tell, especially if you do break down the barrier of like the supernatural and the natural as like not really being distinct, is like, okay, well then how do you tell if not all things that are supernatural are evil and they're not all good? It's like, well, how do you tell the difference? And like it's pretty clear what kind of magics are helpful for the good of Middle Earth, and what the good magic and the bad magic is, and it's by people that want to manipulate or people that want to share. Basically, it seems to be it. I mean, like I know the Hobbit's not a bad example of this, because like at the beginning, like it's mostly dwarves that are just trying to get their treasure back, and of course Thorin literally goes mad because he's focused on sharing the gold. But I think my favorite part in that book, where I'm assuming spoilers are okay for this, where where Bilbo like takes one of the most precious pieces of treasure, if not the most precious thing in there, and he gives it up because it's just like Tolkien says it's like he hesitates as he hands it over, but like the fact that he would still rather hand over treasure, and of course the end quote that everyone loves is like, if people valued food and drink and or company above hoarded gold, like the world would be a better place. And like and that goes for the supernatural stuff too, when you're talking about like, yes, there is a sort of mechanism to the cosmos in that like it's all patterned very very clearly to be something that God set in motion. But yeah, if you're trying to, you mentioned like they were trying to tap into it and be like, we can control this ourselves. It's like, well, yeah, that's the cosmos are not what's evil. You're what's evil because you are trying to take creation and make yourself above God. Whereas, like, and the phrase Christian astrology still doesn't quite sound possible in my mind. But if astrology is just the study of the cosmos and stuff, and people see, yeah, and people don't use that to just like make predictions and put in newspapers and stuff, and they use that to be like, okay, what can I know about God through this, and to again share it, to give it away and stuff, and break that kind of curse that the enemy puts on things of value. It is like that seems to be the best way to differentiate who's a like, yeah, what the good wizards and the bad wizards have in difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, a lot of it does come down to motive.
Yeah, motive.
Who they're serving.
Exactly, yeah. Who they're serving and why they're serving. And yeah. I mean, I guess like we had mentioned Sauron and Morgoth differences earlier, is that like and kind of the quote, there does seem to be some sort of demonic hierarchy, but it's not like in any of these stories, like there's no real point where it's like, or at least any really evil characters that are always like gunning for the succession myth of like kings.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like that God kills his father and then his son kills him. And
yes, in perpetuity, and it's like that. Yeah, even when those entities quote unquote serve each other, it's not like they're doing it out of the goodness of out of the kindness of their heart or something, because the kindness in their heart doesn't exist.
Well, St. John Climacus did say that demons will compete with each other. They will try to see who can inflict more damage on a person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things too that I think Tolkien did really well, is how like one of the one type of creature in the Legendarium that does not have free will, that does not have the flame imperishable, are orcs.
Right.
And they are the most, in a way, disorganized, anarchistic creatures ever. And they show this in the movie when you see Mordor, like they're always fighting with each other. And it's like there is sort of a hierarchy, but the hierarchy is almost like who's bigger, stronger, and meaner.
Exactly. It's not a hierarchy of respect and servitude. Yeah. And that also cascades back down real monarchy is supposed to. It's chaos in all directions. So yeah.
Were there any closing thoughts?
No, that's pretty good. I've stayed here longer than I thought. This was really fun.
Okay, yeah, I think so too. Hopefully that it's been a fun time, and maybe next time we'll see if we can have more people to talk to.
Hopefully. This was fun.
Yeah, so class will be next Monday right here, same time. So if you come at 6 or 6:30, I mean, I don't know. Like the only reason that it became 6 is because there was a mistake made when putting this in the church bulletin. They put 6 instead of 6:30.
Oh, okay. So that was.
Yeah, I got an email saying, "Hey, should we just change the time to 6, or should I try to explain the error?" It's like, you just change it to 6. But
okay, so if I come at 6:30, like I might not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we might just have word of mouth that starts at 6:30.
Cool.
And I think that'll be easier on everyone else too.
Sounds fun. All right, thanks.
All right, cool, man. Well, have a good night.